Have you ever imagined what you would be capable of doing if everything you loved was destroyed before your eyes? If every shred of dignity you tried to preserve was mercilessly torn away day after day? This isn't just another story lost in books. It's a secret few know, but one that changed the fate of hundreds of souls trapped in chains. What I'm about to reveal about Rachel of Savannah was never told in the history books you studied in school. The official documents were burned, the witnesses silenced. But the truth remained alive, whispered from generation to generation. Before we begin, I want to extend an invitation. If this narrative touches your heart, leave a like so more people can learn about these forgotten stories. Subscribe to the channel to dive into other secrets that time has tried to erase. What you'll discover in the next few minutes will completely transform how you see resistance and the pursuit of justice. Something so extraordinary that, even after centuries, it still sends chills down the spines of those who visit the old plantations of Savannah. Now close your eyes and imagine. The sweet scent of cotton mixed with the smell of death, the sound of whips cutting through the hot Georgia air. And in the midst of it all, a woman with a plan no one could have imagined. The sun sets over the ruins of the old Thorn mansion, 12 miles south of Savannah, Georgia. What remains now are only walls blackened by fire, invaded by vines and the gray moss that hangs from century-old oaks. Tourists who visit the place feel an inexplicable chill, even under the suffocating heat of the Georgian summer. They whisper about shadows appearing in broken windows, about the smell of almonds that comes from nowhere, even after almost 2 centuries. It was here that justice took the form of a silver spoon, in the hands of a woman history tried to forget. Rachel, whose wisdom transformed the table of opulence into an altar of sacrifice. What she did that night in 1832 wasn't just an act of personal vengeance. It was the first strike of a silent revolution that spread like poison through the veins of the slave-holding South. The profound truth Rachel left us echoes to this day. When justice is denied for generations, it finds unexpected ways to manifest. The chains that imprison bodies can never contain the strength of a soul seeking freedom. The wind now blows stronger through the ruins, as if carrying the whispers of those who witnessed the end of the Thorn dynasty. And if you stay silent, perhaps you can hear the distant clinking of silver cutlery against fine porcelain, the final toast before the deadly silence. If you want to follow more cases like this, that affect the whole of society, and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any investigation. The Thorn Plantation stretched over more than 3,000 acres of fertile land, with endless rows of cotton that undulated like a white sea under the merciless sun. The main house, an imposing 3-story Georgian construction with 12 columns on its facade, stood on a small elevation from where Colonel Elijah Thorn could contemplate his empire. In the back, the 42 slave cabins formed ordered lines, an illusion of order imposed on shattered lives. The day began long before the sun, with the bronze bell rung at 4 in the morning. In winter, the enslaved marched to the fields still in darkness, feeling the cold dew on their bare feet. In summer, the heat was already suffocating even at that hour. Children from 6 years old carried water buckets to the older ones. Pregnant women worked until the moment of childbirth. Overseer Silas Monroe's whip had a characteristic crack, recognizable from a distance. He had the habit of wrapping the tip in salt before using it on the already open backs of those who did not meet the daily quota of 50 pounds of cotton. Colonel Thorn himself had designed a special stock for punishments with 5 different positions to accommodate any kind of necessary correction, as he proudly explained to visitors during dinners. At night, the sound of drums was forbidden, but even so, one could hear the low murmur of songs in African languages when the overseers had already retired. The smell of exhausted bodies mixed with the aroma of traditional remedies that some women still managed to prepare with herbs collected in secret. And on full moon nights, when the colonel and his guests drank brandy on the veranda, loud laughter echoed across the property, in cruel contrast to the moans coming from the cabins where some women were visited. The air at Thorn Plantation carried an invisible weight, made of despair and contained fury. Birds seemed to fly lower there, as if the sky was less accessible in that cursed piece of land. And when the north wind blew strong, The elders said it was possible to hear the spirits of those who did not survive the crossing of the Atlantic, crying over the waves of the cotton field. When the young doctor from Charleston visited the plantation for the first time, he commented in his diary about a strange miasma of death that seems to hover over the Thorn property, despite all its apparent prosperity. He didn't imagine how prophetic his words would be. Rachel was 32 years old when it all happened, although the sales record described her as healthy black woman of approximately 25 years, complete teeth. Born on the Thorn plantation itself, she had grown up between the main house and the cabins, daughter of Naomi, the head cook. Since childhood, Rachel showed sharp intelligence that didn't go unnoticed by Mrs. Thorn, who brought her into the house as a personal maid at age 7. In the main house, Rachel learned much more than she should have. While arranging books in the library, she absorbed words and ideas. When serving guests, she memorized conversations about politics, business, and medicine. On nights when she needed to prepare remedies for Mrs. Thorn's headaches, Rachel observed the exact proportions, studied the bottles in the medicinal cabinet, associated each herb with its effects. Her position gave her unique access. In the morning, she helped Colonel Thorn with his correspondence, knowing all the financial secrets of the plantation. In the afternoon, she accompanied the mistress on her social visits, absorbing the codes and manners of high society in Savannah. At night, she returned to the cabins to bring hidden food and news from the outside world, becoming a vital bridge between two universes. Rachel has healer's hands, the elders said when she treated whip wounds with poultices that left no scars. Rachel knows the white people's language better than they do, others whispered, when she managed to negotiate a free Sunday or avoid punishments through carefully constructed arguments. This divided existence created a painful paradox in her. Before the Thorns, she kept her eyes lowered and her voice soft, the perfect servant. Alone, her eyes shone with an intensity that frightened even the other enslaved. She carries two hearts in her chest, her mother Naomi used to say, one that beats to survive, another that beats to one day be free. Rachel's true secret, however, was her profound knowledge of plants. In the rare free hours, she wandered through the swamps and woods around the plantation, studying every root, leaf, and seed. She knew which ones healed and which ones killed. She knew which left the body numb and which caused terrible pain. She maintained a small hidden garden behind the cabins, where she cultivated herbs that no one else could identify. When Rachel walks in the forest, the plants whisper their secrets to her, the children told each other. Few imagined how much truth that phrase carried. Leave in the comments, never give up on truth if you believe justice should reach all the oppressed. The year 1831 marked the beginning of the darkest period at Thorn Plantation. The harvest had been exceptional, and Colonel Elijah, intoxicated by success, had become more cruel and merciless. First came the reduction of rations, to increase productivity. Then the prohibition of night worship, to ensure adequate rest. Finally, the separation of families, with the sale of 17 people to plantations in Louisiana, to optimize the workforce. In January, young Daniel, only 12 years old, died after receiving 50 lashes for dropping a basket of cotton. In March, 3 men were chained for 2 days under the sun for being found with a rudimentary map of the region. In April, the small church that the enslaved had built with Mrs. Thorn's permission was demolished to make way for a new storage shed. Rachel witnessed everything with apparently empty eyes while her interior boiled. Each night she treated the wounded in the cabins. Each morning, she served coffee to the Thorn family with the same hands that hours earlier had closed the eyes of another victim. The horror grew when the colonel's eldest son, William Thorn, returned from his studies in Europe. At 24, and with modern ideas, he brought with him pseudoscientific theories about improving the quality of slaves through selective breeding. Under his supervision, men and women were forced to mate like animals, while he took notes in a red leather notebook. "It's a purely scientific process," he explained to guests during dinners, while Rachel served the wine. "In 10 years, we'll have the best workforce in Georgia." In autumn, a mysterious fever spread through the cabins. The doctor from Savannah, called only when the disease had already killed 9 people, including 2 children, diagnosed swamp miasma and recommended only more work in dry air to strengthen the lungs. Rachel knew it wasn't swamp fever. It was exhaustion, malnutrition, and despair. She saw the bodies buried in shallow graves without markings or prayers. She saw Colonel Thorn discuss the replacement price of each one, like someone talking about buying new tools. The final transformation inside her happened when Overseer Silas Monroe entered the cabin where her mother Naomi was caring for a newborn. The screams could be heard all the way to the main house. When Rachel finally managed to get there, she found her mother on the floor, her face so disfigured by blows that she could barely be recognized. Naomi lived only 3 more days, breathing with difficulty, unable to swallow water. In her last breath, she held her daughter's hand and murmured, "Remember who you are. Remember what you know." That night, Rachel didn't cry. She washed her mother's body with rose water she had stolen from Mrs. Thorn. She braided her hair with golden threads unraveled from a curtain in the main house. She placed a small red seed, brought from Africa by her grandmother, under her tongue. And while others sang softly the forbidden funeral chants, Rachel made a silent oath before the body that had given her life. For every drop of blood spilled on this land, for every tear swallowed in silence, for every dream destroyed by the whip, I will bring justice. The next morning, she served coffee to the Thorn family with such a serene smile that the mistress commented on how admirable her composure was, despite the loss of the old Negro woman. Rachel merely nodded and continued with her duties, while something new grew inside her, fueled by pain transformed into purpose. Thorn Plantation didn't just have one cruel master, it was a complete system of oppression with multiple layers. At the top, Colonel Elijah Thorn, with his cold and calculating vision, treating human beings as commodities in an accounting spreadsheet. The secret to profit, he frequently said, is to maximize the value extracted from each piece before its final depreciation. By his side, Mrs. Margaret Thorn, who considered herself benevolent for occasionally intervening when punishments seemed excessively severe. Her false kindness was perhaps more perverse, as it always came with the expectation of infinite gratitude. "I am like a mother to them," she confided to her society friends, while ignoring the cries of real mothers separated from their children. William, the eldest son, combined his father's cruelty with a veneer of European pseudoscience. His laboratory, at the back of the property, where he conducted experiments on the enslaved, was feared by all. Young women, in particular, prayed never to receive the sealed note with his monogram. Emily, the 17-year-old daughter, spoiled and capricious, had the habit of choosing an enslaved child as a pet each month. When she tired of them, the child was sent to the fields, often after some accident that left them marked forever. Reverend Calhoun, who came to the property fortnightly, preached about sacred obedience using carefully selected biblical passages. His favorite sermon about servants who honor their masters was recited while newcomers to the plantation received the thorn mark on their shoulder. Dr. Harrington, who treated the enslaved only when their value was threatened, used them to test new procedures. His name was whispered with terror in the cabins. "If the doctor comes, it's because the master still thinks you're worth the investment," the elders said. "If he doesn't come, prepare to meet the ancestors." At the intermediate level were the overseers, poor white men who unloaded their own misery onto the black bodies under their control. Silas Monroe was the most feared, with his personalized whip that left distinctive marks. Jason Burke preferred to use dogs to discipline fugitives. Thomas Reed was known for his night visits to the cabins of younger women. The structure was maintained by a system of rewards and punishments that fostered distrust. Some enslaved received small privileges in exchange for information about others. The main house had eyes and ears in every corner of the cabins. The event that sealed the fate of the Thorn family occurred on a hot afternoon in August 1832. The colonel had gathered all the enslaved in the central courtyard for an announcement. 3 men had been captured trying to escape during the night. The punishment would be exemplary. Rachel was present, standing next to Mrs. Thorn, holding a parasol to protect her from the sun while watching the scene. The three men, including young Isaiah of only 16 years, for whom Rachel had special affection, were tied to posts. What followed wasn't just a punishment. It was a spectacle of calculated cruelty designed to break not just bodies but spirits. While the whips cut through flesh, William Thorn academically explained the points of the human body that produced maximum pain with minimum permanent damage to the investment. Reverend Calhoun read passages about the punishment of the disobedient. Mrs. Thorn occasionally covered her eyes with a lace handkerchief, but did not withdraw. Isaiah did not survive. His last look crossed with Rachel's for a brief moment, before his head drooped forward, lifeless. In that instant, something broke definitively inside her. Her face remained impassive, her hands continued firmly holding the parasol, but her soul had just crossed a point of no return. That night, alone in the small room at the back of the kitchen, Rachel didn't shed a single tear. Instead, she removed a loose board from the floor and took out a small cloth bundle. Inside, seeds and roots carefully preserved, some brought from Africa by her grandmother, others collected in the swamps. Ancient knowledge passed in whispers through generations. Looking at that forbidden treasure, Rachel made her final decision. The time had come. The winter of 1832 brought unusual cold to Georgia. At Thorn Plantation, the enslaved received only a few extra rags to protect themselves, while in the main house huge fireplaces were kept lit day and night. During a hunt, Colonel Thorn's horse stumbled in a hole hidden by the shallow snow, throwing him to the ground before all his illustrious guests from Savannah. The humiliation was worsened when his broken ankle forced him to use crutches for weeks. Unable to ride or supervise the fields personally, the colonel became even more bitter and violent. Any small error by the domestic servants resulted in disproportionate punishments. Rachel, as responsible for his daily medical care, endured the worst of his temper. On a particularly tense afternoon, when she was applying compresses to his ankle, he complained about the slowness of his recovery. Irritated by the pain, he grabbed the poker from the fireplace and hit Rachel in the face without warning, opening a deep cut on her left cheek. "Incompetent! If Dr. Harrington doesn't cure me soon, I'll test the new trepanation methods William brought from France on you." Blood ran down Rachel's face, dripping onto the imported Persian rug. Mrs. Thorn, present in the room, said nothing, only called another maid to clean the stain before it ruined the valuable fabric. Rachel remained kneeling, her face impassive, while the hot blood marked her simple cotton dress. At that moment, looking at the small red lake forming on the floor, something crystallized in her mind. It was no longer just a matter of justice for the dead. It was a matter of survival for the living. For herself. That night, alone in her small room, Rachel didn't treat the wound immediately. She let the blood dry on her face, forming a ritual mask. Before the small cracked mirror she had managed to hide, she observed the transformation. She no longer saw the Rachel who served in the main house, nor even the Rachel who comforted others in the cabins. She saw an ancient force, an instrument of justice long dormant. With rainwater collected in a gourd, she slowly washed her face, collecting the diluted blood in a small bowl. She mixed it with soil from her mother's grave, which she carried in a small pouch next to her heart. She added 3 drops of a dark green oil extracted from seeds she kept hidden. While the mixture dried, Rachel braided a thin cord with strands of her own hair. The wound on her face would never heal completely. The mark would remain as a constant reminder, a map of the path she had chosen. When Mrs. Thorn saw her the next morning, she commented with disgust that the disfigured face made her unpleasant to look at, and ordered her to use a scarf to cover the scar when serving visitors. Rachel obeyed without protest. The scarf would become part of her new identity, a veil that concealed not only the scar, but also the profound transformation that had occurred. Behind that simple fabric, her eyes observed everything with newfound clarity, calculating, measuring, planning. The decision was made. The method was chosen. All that remained was to wait for the perfect moment. Rachel could not execute her plan alone. In the weeks following her decision, she began to carefully identify potential allies, observing who could be trusted, who had the necessary skills, and mainly, who shared the same silent determination. Sarah, 40 years old, was the head laundress and had access to all corners of the main house. Her hands, wrinkled by lie, knew every piece of clothing, every habit of the Thorns. Moses, 55 years old, took care of the stables and perfectly knew the routine of all visitors. His attentive ears caught conversations that no one imagined were being heard. Young Elias, only 17, worked in the kitchen and could move unnoticed, considered harmless because of his youth and constant smile. Rachel approached each one separately, at carefully chosen moments. She never spoke directly about revenge or escape, dangerous words that could cost their lives if heard by the wrong informant. Instead, she told old stories, African fables about justice and freedom, carefully observing the reactions. The turtle defeated the leopard not with claws, but with patience and wisdom, she told Moses one night, while treating his painful knees with herbal poultices. The old man nodded slightly, understanding the hidden message. To Sarah, she mentioned how certain plants could change the color of clothes if mixed with washing water, transforming something familiar into something unrecognizable. Some changes are invisible until it's too late to turn back, she commented casually. Sarah squeezed her hand in silence. With Elias, she shared the secret of identifying mushrooms identical in appearance, but completely different in their effects. The difference between what nourishes and what kills can be imperceptible to inattentive eyes, she explained, while teaching him to prepare a sauce for the kitchen. To each new ally, Rachel assigned a specific function in the plan, taking shape in her mind. No one knew all the details, only their own part. Compartmentalization was vital to everyone's safety. For 2 months, Rachel meticulously mapped the entire Thorn property, paying special attention to escape routes, guard schedules, and hunting dog habits. She memorized the path to the Ogeechee swamps, where maroons supposedly offered refuge to fugitives. She studied the phases of the moon to determine the darkest nights. Each small necessary object was gradually collected, without arousing suspicion. A bit of rope here, an empty vial there, seeds collected during Sunday walks allowed to domestics. Sarah diverted small quantities of non-perishable food. Moses prepared an apparently broken cart, which was actually in perfect condition. Rachel's plan was extraordinary not for its complexity, but for its elegant simplicity. Intimately knowing the habits of the Thorn family and their fixation with social status, she knew that perfect vengeance would come through their own pride, and the ideal opportunity would arise soon. Annually, the Thorn family held a grand dinner to celebrate the end of the harvest, inviting the most important families from Savannah and surroundings. It was the most important event in their social calendar, an ostentatious demonstration of wealth and power. The next banquet was scheduled for October 15, 1832, New Moon Day. The complete darkness that would cover the subsequent escape couldn't be more perfect. On the eve of the celebration, Rachel gathered her closest allies in a risky meeting behind the barn. She assigned each one their final role, rehearsing every movement, every timing. Like a conductor preparing her orchestra for the definitive performance, she reviewed every detail, anticipating possible complications, planning alternatives. Before separating, the 5 placed their hands on a small mound of earth brought from the graves of those they had lost. No word was spoken. It wasn't necessary. The silent oath was more powerful than any verbalized promise. Tomorrow was the only word Rachel pronounced at the end. The day we serve true justice. In the early hours of October 15, 1832, Thorn Plantation buzzed with activity. In the kitchen, pots bubbled with rich stews, huge roasts turned over the fire, and trays of elaborate sweets were finished with intricate decorations. In the halls, furniture was polished until it shone, chandeliers were cleaned crystal by crystal, and impressive arrangements of flowers picked from the property's private greenhouse perfumed each room. Rachel moved between these two worlds with the precision of a clock. She supervised the preparation of guest rooms, checked the wine selected for each dish, and still found time to help Mrs. Thorn with her elaborate hairstyle and makeup. Meanwhile, at the back of the property, another preparation was happening discreetly. Moses checked the hidden cart, testing the reinforced axle and silent wheels. Sarah packed supplies into compact packages, hiding them in strategic locations along the planned escape route. Elias memorized the positions of night guards, calculating the intervals between their rounds. As the sun began to set, the first carriages arrived via the main road. Men in impeccable frock coats and women in silk dresses descended before the main entrance, where they were received by Colonel and Mrs. Thorn. Rachel observed from the second-floor window while adjusting the imported brocade curtains. Judges, politicians, owners of neighboring plantations, renowned physicians, the elite of Georgian society gathered under the Thorns' roof, displaying jewelry and gold watches, competing in conversations about their possessions and influences. Governor Hopkins was present with his wife, as well as Senator Wilkins and Judge Caldwell. 28 guests in total, in addition to the complete Thorn family. In the kitchen, the crucial moment approached. Rachel had reserved for herself the most dangerous task. With the excuse of preparing the special sauces and finalizing the dishes, she had free access to everything that would be served at the banquet. From the hidden pocket in her apron, she removed a small crystal vial containing a colorless liquid, the result of months of careful preparation. A mixture of plant extracts known only to her grandmother, potentiated by techniques that Rachel had perfected through secret experiments in the swamp. It had no smell, did not alter the taste of food, and its effects manifested gradually, without arousing immediate suspicion. "The mushroom sauce for the main table is ready, ma'am," she announced to the head cook, while adding 3 precise drops of the vial's contents to the creamy mixture. For the selected wines, a different touch, an herbal infusion that would potentiate the effects of the first substance, creating a fatal reaction only when combined in the stomach. In the dining room, servants positioned French imported porcelain on the Irish linen tablecloth. The polished silver cutlery reflected the light of the chandeliers. Rachel personally supervised the arrangement, ensuring that the places of the Thorn family and their most important guests received special attention. "Make sure Governor Hopkins receives the special red wine that Colonel Thorn selected," she instructed Elias with a significant look. The young man nodded imperceptibly. While guests savored appetizers in the living room, Rachel made a final check of each element of the plan. The new moon would ensure an especially dark night. The guards' horses had received a small dose of laxative in their feed, enough to keep them restless and distracted. The colonel's favorite hunting dog slept deeply after eating a piece of meat treated with a mild sedative. At 8 o'clock sharp, dinner was announced. The guests took their places at the huge table, amid laughter and animated conversations. Colonel Thorn rose for a pompous toast, celebrating the abundant harvest and the prosperity that God had granted to the just stewards of the land and its resources. Rachel, standing by the wall with the other servants, observed each face, engraving them in her memory. The first course was served, a soup of shellfish specially brought from the coast. Then came roasted meats, stuffed fowl, glazed vegetables, each dish more opulent than the previous one. Wines flowed generously, selected to complement each stage of the meal. The diners praised the excellence of the cuisine, unaware that each forkful brought them closer to the fate that Rachel had meticulously planned for them. William Thorn, always eager to impress, stood up to speak about his latest theories on efficient human resource management in modern agriculture. His speech was received with nods of approval. Judge Caldwell shared an anecdote about a fugitive slave who had been captured and exemplarily punished. Laughter echoed through the room. It was during dessert, an elaborate pudding of crystallized fruits, that the first sign appeared. Mrs. Hopkins raised her hand to her forehead, commenting on a sudden heat she felt. Minutes later, Reverend Calhoun coughed discreetly, a streak of sweat running down his temple despite the mild temperature of the room. Colonel Thorn, in the middle of a story about his latest hunt, stopped abruptly, his face suddenly pale. "A bit of indisposition," he murmured, trying to pick up the thread of his narrative. Beside him, William swallowed with difficulty, his breathing becoming visibly laborious. Rachel moved efficiently around the room, filling glasses, removing plates, her serene expression hiding the inner storm. When Senator Wilkins brought his hands to his stomach with a muffled groan, she solicitously offered, "Perhaps a little brandy to aid digestion, sir?" The brandy, of course, contained the last substance of the triad that Rachel had prepared, the final catalyst that would drastically accelerate the process already underway in the diners' bodies. In 20 minutes, chaos had set in. Guests collapsed from their chairs, afflicted by violent convulsions. Screams of pain and desperate pleas for help echoed through halls previously decorated for celebration. Dr. Harrington, himself barely able to stand, tried uselessly to offer help to others. "What's happening? What is this?" shouted Colonel Thorn, his face contorted in agony as he tried to reach the bell to call for more help. His fingers, already paralyzed, couldn't reach it. Rachel approached him slowly, leaning as if to offer assistance. Instead, she whispered in his ear, "This, Colonel, is the taste of justice. The same poison that now runs in your veins ran in the veins of all those you destroyed. The difference is that they suffered for years. You will have only a few more minutes." In the Colonel's eyes, the horrible recognition of the truth emerged like a storm. He tried to scream, but his voice had already disappeared. His last look was one of pure terror, as he fully comprehended who the woman who had served in his house for so many years really was. In less than an hour, all 28 guests and the 5 members of the Thorn family were dead or dying, their bodies contorted in grotesque positions around the festive table. The harvest banquet had transformed into a feast of death. Rachel walked calmly among the bodies, checking each one. For those still with a thread of life, she leaned in and whispered the name of someone they had tortured or killed. "This is for Isaiah," she said to young William. "This is for Naomi," she murmured to the Colonel, whose glassy eyes could no longer see her. When she finished her macabre round, Rachel removed the scarf that covered her scar and placed it on Colonel Thorn's face, her final signature on that work of brutal justice. Outside, the plan entered its second phase. Elias had run to the cabins, giving the agreed signal. Dozens of enslaved gathered silently at designated points, carrying only the essentials. Moses guided the prepared cart to the back entrance. Sarah distributed packages with supplies and detailed instructions about the path to follow. Rachel joined them at the stables, now wearing simple travel clothes. Her face, with the exposed scar, shone in the faint light of the covered lanterns. "It is done," was all she said. There was no need for more words. The silence in the main house told the complete story. Before departing, Rachel executed the final act of her plan. With torches prepared with a special oil that produced intense flames difficult to extinguish, she and Moses set fire to strategic points of the main house. The fire spread with surprising veracity, devouring wood, fabric, and flesh indiscriminately. The flames illuminated the night sky, a beacon of destruction visible for miles. They would serve both as a distraction for any pursuers and as a signal to other enslaved on neighboring plantations. A fire code that said, "Tonight, something has changed forever." 73 people left Thorn Plantation that night. Men, women, and children who had lived their entire existence under the yoke of the whip and chains. They divided into smaller groups, following different routes to confuse potential pursuers. Some would head north, others to the swamps, some to hidden maroon communities. Rachel led the largest group, 19 people including all the elderly and small children. They moved through the darkness like shadows, using the paths she had meticulously mapped for months. Her knowledge of herbs allowed them to cover their scent from hunting dogs, rubbing specific leaves on their clothes and skin. Before entering the dense swamp vegetation, Rachel paused for a moment, looking back. The southern horizon glowed in shades of red and orange as the Thorn mansion was consumed by flames. On her face, illuminated by the distant fire, there was no triumph or joy, only a solemn resolution, like someone who had finished a necessary but painful task. "Let's go," she said simply, turning to the path ahead. "Our future waits beyond the swamp." The column of smoke from the burning Thorn mansion could be seen 20 miles away. When the first rescue carriages arrived from neighboring properties, they found only a collapsing structure amid hungry flames, and inside it, the remains of what had been one of the greatest banquets of Georgian society. Initial official reports described the incident as a tragic accident, speculating that some candle had fallen on flammable fabrics during dinner. Authorities took days to recover and identify all the charred bodies. The discovery that all the enslaved from the property had disappeared raised the first suspicions. It was only when Dr. Pritchard from Savannah examined the remains that the truth began to emerge. The signs of poisoning were clear in the bodies less damaged by fire. The evidence of violent convulsions before death, crisped fingers, contorted positions, expressions of agony, left no doubt. The governor of Georgia received an alarming report. The events at Thorn Plantation represent the most audacious and sophisticated act of slave rebellion ever recorded in our state. The precision of the mass poisoning suggests advanced knowledge of chemistry and medicine. The coordination of the subsequent escape indicates meticulous planning and exceptional leadership. Letters circulated among plantation owners of the South, warning about a new and terrible threat to our way of life. The term Savannah method began to appear in official documents and private correspondence, referring to poisonings followed by fires. In the following weeks, similar incidents, although on a smaller scale, were reported on plantations in southern Carolina and northern Florida. 3 families of farmers died after dinners, where only the domestics had prepared the food. 2 main houses were mysteriously set on fire during the night, with all the enslaved disappearing without a trace. Panic spread. Owners began to bring white cooks from the north to test food with condemned slaves before consuming it, to double the vigilance in kitchens. Punishments for escapes became even more severe in the hope of discouraging future rebellions. But for each story that circulated among the masters, another version, whispered in slave quarters and cabins throughout the South, spread a different message. In these narratives, Rachel wasn't a criminal, but a liberator. Her method wasn't just one of destruction, but of liberation. Her name became a symbol of hope, proof that even the most oppressive system had vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Rachel's poison became a code among the enslaved, representing not just the literal act of poisoning, but any form of resistance that used the knowledge of the oppressed against the oppressor. She proved they are not invincible, they said in night conversations. She showed that our knowledge is power. Meanwhile, the official response from authorities was relentless. A reward of $10,000, an astronomical sum for the time, was offered for information leading to Rachel's capture, described on posters as black woman, approximately 30 years, prominent scar on left face, extremely dangerous and versed in poisons. The state militia was mobilized. Groups of slave hunters with tracking dogs scoured the swamps and forests of the region. Known maroon communities were attacked and destroyed. The border with the northern states was heavily guarded. Fear had changed sides. Now it was the oppressors who looked with suspicion at each glass of water, at each plate of food, at each apparently submissive face that served them. The Great Hunt, as it became known, lasted almost 6 months. Dozens of fugitives were captured, but most kept silent even under torture. The loyalty to Rachel and what she represented was stronger than the fear of physical pain. In April 1833, the authorities finally received concrete information. A fisherman had spotted a group of people matching the descriptions of the Thorn Plantation fugitives, hidden on a remote island in the middle of the Okefenokee swamps, on the border between Georgia and Florida. Captain James Hargrove, a veteran of the wars against the Seminoles and known for his brutality, personally led a force of 60 heavily armed men. They approached the island from 3 different directions, hoping to completely surround the camp. What they found was a small, well-organized settlement, simple but solid cabins, productive gardens, an ingenious system for collecting rainwater. About 30 people lived there, including some of the enslaved from Thorn Plantation, who had opted to remain closer instead of risking the long journey north. The battle was brief and brutal. The fugitives, armed only with improvised tools and a few ancient muskets, fought with the ferocity of desperation. Women and children tried to escape using hidden canoes, but were intercepted by soldiers positioned in the channels. At the center of the resistance was a figure who matched Rachel's description, a thin woman with a prominent scar on her face, fighting with the calculated fury of someone who had already accepted her fate. Even when she was wounded by a shot to the shoulder, she continued to coordinate the defense, using her knowledge of the swampy terrain to ambush the attackers. It was only when most of the defenders had fallen and the cabins began to burn under the soldiers' torches that Rachel was finally cornered on the northern shore of the island. Surrounded by 6 men with rifles aimed at her, she remained erect and fearless. Captain Hargrove, eager to take credit for the capture, stepped forward. "Are you the murderess known as Rachel of Savannah?" he demanded. The response he received became legendary, repeated in whispers for decades. "I am not a murderer. I am justice. And justice, like poison, once released into the blood, cannot be removed." They say she then raised her hand, revealing a small red seed between her fingers. Before any soldier could react, she put it in her mouth and bit down. Her eyes never left the captain's as the poison, the same she had used at the Thorn banquet, coursed through her body with lightning speed. In her final moments, with her body already paralyzed but her mind still clear, Rachel smiled. The soldiers, superstitious, retreated before that serene smile of a woman dying by her own choice. Her last words, recorded in Captain Hargrove's official report, were, "What I have planted has already grown beyond the reach of your fires. You may kill me, but you cannot kill what I have begun." Rachel died right there, on the muddy bank of that nameless island, refusing to give her pursuers the satisfaction of displaying her as a trophy or executing her publicly. Her body was taken to Savannah, where the authorities, in a final act of petty revenge, denied her a burial, surrendering her remains for dissection at the local medical college. But this last indignity had the opposite effect to what was intended. The students and doctors who examined her body noticed something extraordinary. Despite years of forced labor and deprivation, Rachel's body was exceptionally healthy and strong. More surprising still, they found evidence that she had developed a gradual tolerance to various poisons, taking small doses over time, an ancient technique known to few. The medical reports, although intended to be purely scientific, could not hide a note of admiration for the intelligence and determination that such discoveries revealed. A medical student noted in his private diary, "Today we examined the body of a slave who, through pure intellect and willpower, achieved what entire armies failed to accomplish. I cannot help but wonder what contributions this remarkable mind could have made to science, had society not determined that her only value lay in her capacity for labor." While Rachel's physical body was the object of clinical study, her story took on a life of its own, spreading through enslaved and free communities throughout the South. As happens with figures who transcend common mortality, the narrative acquired mythical elements, expanding beyond the documented facts. In the cotton plantations of Mississippi, it was said that she had managed to escape the final siege, and that the body examined in Savannah was that of another woman. In the sugar-cane fields of Louisiana, it was said that she had taught her knowledge of herbs to hundreds of other women before her capture. In taverns frequented by sailors in Charleston, there was talk of sightings of a woman with a scar on her face on ships bound for Haiti, where she had supposedly established a community of fugitives. Among Northern abolitionists, Rachel's story was repeated as an example of the brutality of the slave system and the heroic resistance against it. Frederick Douglass, in a speech in Boston in 1845, indirectly referred to her. "When we deny humanity to our fellow beings, we should not be surprised when they respond not as humans, but as forces of nature, relentless, inevitable, beyond our control or comprehension." In the cabins and slave quarters, however, Rachel became something more than a martyr or political symbol. She was almost a supernatural entity, a powerful ancestor who could be invoked in moments of extreme need. Small statuettes carved in wood, representing a woman with a mark on her face, were hidden under floorboards or buried near cabins. Specific herbs, arranged in a certain way, were considered a request for protection or intervention from Rachel's spirit. Coded songs told her story in terms that only the initiated understood. One of the most popular began like this: "The lady with the scar knows herbs that heal. The lady with the scar knows plants that free. When the table is set and the wine is served, the lady with the scar whispers, 'I am by your side.'" Decades later, long after the formal abolition of slavery, historians tried to separate myth from reality in Rachel of Savannah's story. Official records confirmed the incident at Thorn Plantation and the subsequent hunt. Letters and diaries of the time mentioned the panic among owners after the event. The medical reports of the dissection still existed in the University of Georgia archives. But beyond these documentary fragments, the true Rachel remained elusive, her essence preserved more faithfully in oral tradition than in written records. Academics debated whether she had acted alone or as part of a larger resistance network, whether her knowledge of herbs came from preserved African traditions or had been developed through her own experimentation, whether her actions were an isolated case or part of a broader pattern of resistance through poisoning. The academic debate, however, mattered little to the communities that kept her memory alive. In rural areas of Georgia and South Carolina, it was not uncommon, until the early 20th century, to find small offerings left at crossroads: 3 red seeds, a braided ribbon, a little honey, on specific days of the year. In Savannah, a more discreet annual ritual took place near the site where Thorn Plantation once stood. Black families gathered for an apparently common picnic, during which the elders told the children the story of Aunt Rachel, not as a horror tale, but as a reminder that justice, even when slow, is as inevitable as the cycle of seasons. In the early decades of the 20th century, with increased migration to urban and industrialized areas of the North, Rachel's story traveled with the descendants of the enslaved. In Chicago, Detroit, and New York, it became part of the repertoire of tales that connected new generations to their Southern roots. In some cases, elements of her story were incorporated into syncretic religious practices, where Rachel appeared as an intermediary figure between Christian saints and African deities. Today, few visitors strolling through the historic streets of Savannah know Rachel's story. The site of the former Thorn Plantation was gradually absorbed by urban growth, without any official marking recognizing the events that occurred there. In tourist tours about the dark side of Savannah, guides occasionally mention the mysterious mass poisoning of 1832, but usually as a macabre curiosity, devoid of its historical context and deeper meaning. However, for those who know how to listen, the story persists. In certain tea houses run by elderly black women in the outskirts of Savannah, a specific infusion is offered on special occasions, a gentle mixture of herbs that, it is said, cleanses the body and strengthens the spirit. When serving, the hostess may make a casual comment about how some recipes are passed down through generations, holding secrets that aren't in books, and in certain private gardens carefully maintained, a plant with small white flowers and bright red seeds is cultivated with special attention. If a visitor asks its name, the answer may come in the form of a story. The story of a woman with a scar on her face, who transformed knowledge into freedom and poison into justice. When the last ray of sun reflects on the waters of the Savannah River, they say that for a brief moment it is possible to see, in the undulating surface, the reflection of a woman standing on the bank, her face marked not only by a physical scar, but by the unwavering determination of one who dared to defy a system that intended to reduce human beings to property. If you watched until here, it's because you care about these stories that forever marked our country. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until here," so I can get to know you and know who really cares about the search for historical truth. Like this video if Rachel's story touched your heart. Share so that Rachel's memory is never forgotten.